Hello, and welcome back to Dev Game Club, a weekly podcast in which two veteran game developers look at games from the past to discuss their relevance and impact today. I'm Brett Duville, and I'm joined as always by my co-host, a man racked with guilt about leaving his comrade behind.
Tim Longo.
I guess that's me this time. Yeah, you have a history. You have a pattern, sir, of leaving characters behind for future development.
Well, I think I'd like to have a meaningful
cliffhanger. I got it.
Meaningful kind of ending with something that wants, and when we as we're talking about Republic Commando, of course, of
yes.
episode 3.
We're really looking with a lens on Tim's career. Let's be honest.
No. Well, with this particular topic, I think it might be the case, but I don't know. You start a project with best intentions, and projects take a long time to finish, and who knows what happens during the development of a game.
Yeah.
And
for sure.
We definitely had goals, and it doesn't take a rocket science to figure out what we wanted to do maybe next, right? So when you have a character left behind, we would want to follow that up, but we didn't get to.
You know what? I actually think that this will take us perfectly into our one of our topics that we haven't really talked about, which is sort of a reboot. We've kind of alluded to it a little bit, a reboot of the characters and the grim humor and things like that, some of the writing changes, the voice acting, moving them from clones to like literally identical clones in the sense of like, well, one's you're in charge, but they're all sound-alikes, as I recall. They weren't all. I mean, we might have tried all with Tamara Morrison and then tried sound-alikes to make them a little bit different. And we had gotten feedback from George Lucas via management about who had seen our game, which was not a thing I think had happened on any of my other games I've worked on at LucasArts.
No, it was rare. Yeah, it was rare.
Yes, it was pretty rare. And I think at the time the new president had more of a connection with George because he had worked, I guess, in licensing, maybe
marketing.
He was okay,
head of marketing for the prequels, basically.
Okay, which did very well marketing wise.
Yeah, I would say
a lot of good deals there. Anyway, so he had George's ear and had shown the games that the studio was working on and what they were planning on doing, and George had given feedback about how the clones were not distinct, there was no lightness, it was all grim, and that there was no way to tell them apart. All of which was true. And as I recall, the sort of thing that we had heard about George was, well, you can ignore his feedback if he only gives it once, because it's just kind of a side thought and he maybe doesn't really care. But in this particular case, he brought it up a second time. And if George brings up a thing a second time, you have to act on it, is basically what it comes down to. So I want to say in like May, right after E3, probably, maybe, no, I think it was around then. I think it was like May, June. He had seen the thing, probably the demo, was shown, or maybe as part of the lead up to E3. However he came to see it, he got a look at it and had suggested those sorts of changes to differentiate the characters more, feel free to play with them, do whatever we wanted, right? You got to remember, this is the guy who's like, sure, purple lightsaber, no problem, right? I mean, it's, he was not precious about that sort of stuff that we were more likely to be, which was kind of surprising because dealing with George versus dealing with licensing was maybe a different, people in licensing were also very respectful and you're not allowed to make changes without approval and blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
So, you want to talk about that part of it a little bit?
Yeah, it's a fascinating, I think you hit the nail on the head. It's a fascinating juxtaposition with how things were then, because it definitely was rare that you would have feedback directly from him, but yeah, I think the prequels he got a little bit more involved, but he was much more focused on character and story arc than fiction and lore, is how I would put it, and Lucas licensing, especially, the specific subgroup that's in charge of the lore side of things, keeping that all straight. Obviously their job is all about fiction and lore, right? And making sure that that's correct. And they don't really necessarily worry as much about character arcs. So he would, like Brett said, he would just change things lore-wise willy-nilly, because if it fit the story arc that he wanted to tell with the films and the characters, then that was more important to him. But of course, fans love lore, like myself. So when you break things, then it makes people upset. Anyway, we don't have to go down that road too far. But his, we talked about, I think, in a previous episode, where we weren't sure how the clones were going to progress as an army, right? Whether they were going to continue to have paint on them, how far the paint was going to go, how much differentiation. Of course, I don't remember the timing of the Clone Wars show. I guess that would have been afterwards.
That was definitely later. Yeah.
So he and Dave
I think
Filoni,
the next year is Gennady Tarkovsky did the first episodes, maybe in 2005. I'm guessing.
Yeah. So it was
that was around when I first started catching up with something like Samurai Jack a little bit and being like, oh, this guy's got a really cool style, and I never watched any of the Clone Wars.
And I think notoriously George was really jealous of those episodes that he did of the first early 2D animated Clone Wars show stuff. So, and then George was directly involved with the TV show, the CG show that Dave Filoni headed up, and they worked on that together. But I bring that up because differentiating the clones was a big focus of theirs as well, right? That those characters were all technically clones, but they were, clearly had their own identities. Tamora Morrison didn't do the voice for everybody, etc. And so we definitely had started that way. And as we talked about in previous episodes, we even had a goal to try to tell that clone story, right? Like how wacky it is to be a clone and all that stuff. And that progressed over time to the elite commandos and blah, blah, blah. So in retrospect, of course, his feedback is not out of left field when you think about it, when you put all the pieces together. But at the time, for me, who was trying to set the vision and wanting to really focus on, the expendable clone experience, I have a vague memory of pushing back or like not agreeing or something like that. And like,
we pushed back, right? Because it was also potentially going to totally blow the schedule, right?
No, there were production realities for sure as well. But even separate from that creatively, there was sort of like, it was anathema to what we were trying to do to some degree. And so there was that, but the truth of the matter is he was right.
Yeah.
And there are things that I don't agree with him on and that he's done with his world, but this one I think he was right on, and it proved to be the case in the show as well, the Clone Wars show. And then the other element to it, not only differentiation, because as we'll talk about with the way that sort of the game ends and everything, and I have
on that point, right? I mean, I remember saying to you when we had gotten that feedback, and my natural reaction too had been just like, this would have been good to know a year ago, not now.
Right.
In the last year, and maybe we may have even been aiming for like September at that point. Like, I want to say that it was a Christmas, before Christmas kind of release at that point.
Oh, we might have been. Yeah, I forget.
And that was a big part of it too. It was just like, well, we can't possibly unless we move the ship date. So that was part of the realities. But the thing that I said was, if we could get those sorts of things relaxed, it probably would be good, because the story didn't really dramatically change. And I said to you, like, I don't know which of the clones disappears at the end. Like I don't know like which of them it is. Like I couldn't tell you. And I had, that level had been built or, somewhat built, but we knew what the story was and all that stuff. And I was like, I've played that. I don't know which one it is, so there's something to that.
No,
but it was just like rock hard place, with the schedule the way it was.
Yeah, right. And for better or for worse, there's this concept that Brett's going to hate for me to say, and Chris Williams would always hate too. And I, to some degree, hate being in the position of it, because I would like to think that I try to be a reasonable, pragmatic, creative person / director. But to some degree, the creative director is supposed to be the one to push back on things like that, on schedule, right? And to say, if it's, and obviously you meet in the middle, right? It's not like someone's supposed to win necessarily, but Brett and I would always be sort of intentionally on different sides of the, well, we don't have time, but yes, but we need the game to be better kind of thing, right?
Right.
And you compromise along the way, and you try to compromise.
It's what
the right
Darren
things.
would call like a healthy tension in game development.
Yeah.
That you need both sides of that to be pushing. Otherwise, on the one hand, you get a thing that never ships because it can always be better. On the other hand, you have something that's uninspired because you don't take any risks, right? So you have to really pull those two things.
And that
together.
balance is hard to find, right? It's hard to know, it's per case basis, and we won't even go into co-op conversation, or we could, and so, but in this case, I wasn't sure I agreed at first, right? And this is a full, like, mea culpa, whatever you want to say, where, I was wrong and I was too stubborn, and, it's the sort of like, I probably thought I had some vision that needed to stay true. But to your point, like, the feedback was not just from George, it was from the team, it was from you. And I think it was right, and it's a good example of, however I eventually became convinced, maybe even just forced, it came out for good. And so the other part of his feedback, actually, which we always ironically joke about, is humor. Brett kind of alluded to the fact that the game up to that point had been very grim, and it was, it was meant to be that sort of Medal of Honor kind of, days in the life of these soldiers. And so one of his initial do you remember the Robin Williams suggestion?
Do. Yes.
Which we might have joked about on the podcast over these time. Who knows? But yeah, he had suggested, because he was friends with Robin Williams. And Robin
lived
Williams
in
was
Marin.
Local. Yeah. He lived in northern San Francisco sort of section. And so he's like, yeah, I can get Robin on the phone and we can have him do one of the voices for the clones. And I was like, absolutely not. That's not.
That is too far.
That's too far. But, the spirit of what he was saying was in there. And it really just came down to, and I, in retrospect, I kick myself, because from a Shakespearean perspective, every drama, every tragedy has humor in it in some way, because it's a important part of the formula of relieving tension and having that good ebb and flow back and forth. So,
and soldiers need it too, right? Just to deal with the grimness. Mm-hmm. There's this level of remove, and that's, that sort of gallows humor is part of a lot of those sorts of, often valorizing accounts of either soldiering or policing or whatever, homicide detectives making a joke literally on every Law and Order, in the first few minutes about the bad thing that happened. So it's well-founded. And I think there's good psychological reasons for it, both dramatically and also from a standpoint of, well, how do these characters get through their lives? So I think it's all, perfectly reasonable, and just, we were too close to it, I think, to see it. And also just had this reasonable expectation, without having had any countervening information, that they were clones. They were supposed to be the same. They were supposed to be somewhat mechanical, really, right? We'd never seen stormtroopers have emotions, right? It wasn't until episode 7, The Force Awakens, where we even saw one not be a clone, never mind have any regrets about what happened. So there's just a lot that we didn't have access to, to think about or even consider. So I don't feel like we were wrong to approach it that way, but getting the feedback and thinking about it was like, well, if we if we can move, if we have time to do this, we basically added something like 3 months to the schedule, I think, as a result. And they're like, no, it would take this kind of time because we have to rework the script. It has to all be recorded and implemented into the levels. It was just a lot.
Yeah.
A lot.
And voice. Yeah. Well, and to your point about like sort of our preconceived notions about what we could do with clones, I think his feedback, though I don't think he meant it this way, I think his feedback also ended up kind of being like permission, right? It was sort of like he was giving us permission to actually do things that do make sense and maybe we could have come up with earlier ourselves if we thought it was even on the table. You know what I mean? It just came too late. But to your point about like the extra time or what have you, and you know, maybe many of the listeners know this, but I bet some don't. Voice recording specifically is a no joke process. Like you don't do it. Right.
I mean, we talked about it in the Tomb Raider, Shadow of the Tomb Raider with Jill Murray about what that means for a script. Yeah.
I mean, you have to, there's a long lead time. You have to get into studios. There's scheduling involved. There's a lot of extra cost if you have to go back multiple times. Like it's, you know, you're dealing with actors who are in appropriately in unions, you know, and stuff like that. So it's going, you know, luckily I don't think we had done a lot of the like heavy lifting on that yet, but we were right around the time when we needed to pull the triggers on some of that stuff. And you get your voice recorded earlier than people probably realize. Yeah. And so you have to have that stuff locked down. So it probably was I don't remember, but it was probably like the last moment that we could have done that without like great cost and pain, even greater cost and pain. So
yeah, to that point, Ken Ralston, who was I think the last Bethesda RPG he worked on was Morrowind, old hand
Oblivion
RPGs. Maybe Oblivion. Yeah, maybe Oblivion.
I think that was his swan song, but
he and I didn't overlap, I guess is at least what I would say. But he had said, you know, one of the things that has really impacted RPGs and like the strength of the stories is that you get fewer iterations on your story because you have to lock down for voice. And that's months and months ahead. That's with text-based RPGs, you can be going up literally to the day before you ship if it's a digital release, or the day before you lock, I guess, if you're gonna print discs, and be making tweaks to things. And there comes a point where you just can't. I mean, you might have pickups and be able to do a few additional lines, but if the thing's not working, it's too late often by the time you realize it's not working, because you've already put, especially as casts get more expensive. I mean, we were mostly unknowns, right? Or not well-known voice actors, I should say, not unknowns, but people who were not, not your Patrick Stewarts and Liam Neesons and whoever Max von Sydow's that we had on Bethesda games that I worked on, or that they worked on. And that just adds a whole nother. I mean, you can't just be like, oh, Sir Patrick, we're going to need you this weekend. That's not a thing that happens, right? It's all that stuff's in contracts and how much time that they'll put into it and when, and it's a whole big complicated thing. Apparently Tamura himself was pretty chill about the whole thing, and was a real peach to work with, I gather, from Dave Collins, who did a lot of his direction. So
there's actually, after we finished, after I finished, I rewatched those making of videos, which I hadn't seen in a long time, and the Tamura Morrison ones just.
I didn't watch them because I lived it, man.
Well, they don't even focus on our stuff.
No, they don't, because our stuff is not interesting.
No, it's like it was, and he's just charming and clearly loving doing what he's doing, and he talked about the humor in that interview as well. Probably, suggested topics for him to actually talk about or something. But he picked up on some of that stuff, and he talked about how he's the leader of, it was just, they gave him good talking points.
That's good.
And it was fun to watch. So I definitely recommend checking that video out. But so every clone had a different voice, and, we're cast toward the characterization. When you have people, even today, when I have people tweeting at me specific names of the squad members, that there was at least some success there, right? Because not only did we leave one behind who's pretty memorable, but you have Scorch, who's obviously the Joker of the group, and the voice actor that we hired for that was more in line with that characterization, and the script would follow, and it makes each of the moments more memorable as well, right? Even putting somebody on a maneuver, as we talked about, I think last episode, when you put Sev on a maneuver that he doesn't like, he responds to it, and that's a dynamic script that is related to gameplay that we had to write to accommodate that stuff. And Ryan and Mike were, figuring out the best ways to systemically, with John Hancock, to systemically trigger that stuff and it feel appropriate, but once you have identities for the characters, the scripts are easier to write as well, right? Because because
there's particularities that you can lean on.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, it's hard to write for generic, right? I mean, that's why, honestly, so many video game scripts historically have just not been great, because the characters are not specific, right? I mean, they're just types. And although these are very stereotypical characters, they do get more specific. Sure, he's this gruff, tough, guy, but also he's the sniper, and he believes in the sniper, right? And the role of the sniper, right? It's really important to him to be precise, and I don't know. I mean, that just like developing the characters enough to have something to lean on is really important, and having a good-natured guff that they give each other about them being on either sides of that dichotomy of blow things up versus surgically remove them is great fun, and there's a lot of enjoyment out of that. So
yeah. So that was a big sea change for the project that we always talk about. That's kind of one of those. It's kind of one of those development stories, that you get from projects.
I want to say, as a result, we also around the same time had done this offsite that I know I mentioned briefly in a prior episode, where I think basically because we knew we were going to have more time to deal with the script issues from all the stuff we just described. We wanted to. Darren felt like we had a game that was, a decent game, but could be better, and maybe we should get together and figure out how, since we were gonna have a little more time, maybe how we could more profitably use that time. And we did something that I think was unique in terms of LucasArts history, in that the whole team, and I don't mean just development, but also the people in marketing and voice and audio and whatever that were not directly part of the team, we were supporting multiple teams, all went off-site to like a conference center type thing in Marin, and had a day where we just had we broke up into groups and tried to sprinkle people from all, QA, I think it went as well, and just have these groups of diverse team members, different disciplines together to talk about what was working and what wasn't working in the game. We got some feedback like it doesn't feel Star Warsy enough. I remember being a thing that came out of that. I don't remember specifically. I think that was mostly in the art direction more than it was anything else. It was more about the environmental art, I think, was part of that. But there was a lot that just kind of came out of that as well, of just how to punch up the game a lot. And that I always look back kind of fondly at that, and in a little bit of wonder. Like, I don't know how that happened, but Darren just kind of made it happen. We all did that.
Yeah, taking a team offline for even a day like that is usually verboten, right? Like, it's something that is hard to convince people of. It's good to have your EP embrace it. And, I think to your point about it being rare, I think it is obviously a common thing to do with the team. Usually it's smaller at the time, but a common thing to do with the team in pre-production, right? When you're getting going, but it's not something that's common to do in essentially sort of like your closing phase, right? Or you're getting ready for your closing phase where you're trying to actually close production down and polish. But it is I think all of us look back fondly on it as a very smart sort of strategic move for any game. And I've actually used it since then. When after I've gotten permission, which isn't very often, to try to use it as in that later phase where you know, getting something to an alpha or even a beta state, and depending on your production, like that is often the time where you're like, okay, we have it all together and we think it's working and we see potential, but it's just not there yet. You know, it needs something, it needs another wave of just stepping back with perspective and saying, okay, what is it that really needs to happen? Because when you're closing down, you know, you can't do everything you want to do. So you have to really find the right things to do. And you're so frantic and sprinting toward the end at that point, no one ever takes a breath, you know? Right. And I think that represented a breath for the team to say, it's okay to be critical about something that isn't working. Let's brainstorm solutions and be clever about it. And then we'll schedule that out until the end. And I think it really did help. I'd like to think that it did.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, basically we got trained to be sort of, I don't know, what do you call it when you're leading a little group like that? But, you know, because we broke up into facilitate the discussions, right? So we had different leads basically split into these groups. And because I remember I was one of them, and I was basically writing on the big pad, you know, or whatever, to get all the ideas down. And then at the end, everybody presenting sort of their findings, you know, and saying, yeah, well, and there was some structure to it, but it was a full day. It was offsite, and it was, like I said, it was everybody. And that is, not a thing that happens often.
Yeah. And I think even if it's not that elaborate, I think I just would encourage anyone who has a good foundation of a game, you know, in whether it's a small team or a large team or whatever, to give yourself permission to take a step back like that late in development, not late, but, you know, mid to late in development to really, you know, look at it through a different lens, you know, steps to just take that step back. Obviously everyone should be doing usability testing and play testing and stuff. So, you know, you get some of that there, but unless you literally have the whole team in those sessions discussing all of the stuff at the same time, you know, that often gets lost in translation as well. So you really need discipline there. But yeah, I forgot that happened around the same time.
Yeah, it was right around. I can't remember the exact sequence of all these events, but I think basically they were somehow related, or also with the change in leadership and maybe trying to, you know, shake things up a little bit and having I don't know what the horse trading was on that, whether Darren took that opportunity to say, you know what we could use, you know, or something like that, to get an ask for a team when new management comes in. That's sometimes how things like that happen. But so some of that I don't really have visibility. It didn't have visibility into. Let's move to the Kashyyyk levels, or as you say, Kashyyyk. I prefer the canonical George pronunciation. But anyway, the Wookiee homeworld levels, right? This is something that happened in, I guess, in episode 3. They go to this planet, and there's world trees and life debts and things. Life debts for everyone. This was the most difficult section for sure. Should probably touch on that a little bit, and in a couple particular ways. I think we have. You see, everything's on display at this point, and we're using all the enemies, including a new enemy with the, I don't know what that guard is, but it's a melee attacking thing, which is
Grievous's guards,
guards, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
The
Jedi hunters or something.
Who knows?
I forget what they're called, but they're essentially droids, but they work for Grievous, who is a cyborg.
Right, they're droids, so having the EM pulse grenades is the way to go if you can pick up enough of those. But they're tough. And then, of course, you know, leading up to the big kind of story conclusion, that we were the vanguard of a major offensive on this planet or something. So
yeah, and
you have any particular high points, low points you want to hit?
Well, one thing that I don't think, I think we could have done a better job with sort of visualizing it, but that I did appreciate about this operation is the sense of like going through the layers of Kashyyyk, starting at the ground, like on, in the forest floor, and having this sort of jungly feel, and then, eventually getting higher and higher as you go up through the trees. So that was a cool, at least for me, I don't know if we fully achieved it, but that was an element that I liked at the beginning of this. The other thing I wanted to mention is I'm pretty sure Tarfful was a character from the films as well. So
okay.
I had actually forgotten that Sun Fac wasn't the only one that we, other than Yoda, of course, that we leveraged. And so Tarfful, I think, is a Wookiee leader that we obviously couldn't kill off because he needs to survive into episode 3. And, Kashyyyk also sort of represents that bookend of the time between Geonosis and Order 66, right? So we're kind of trying to tell a little bit of that gap story between the two films, right? And the big events for the Clone Army. So I kind of always, I don't remember the specific discussions on when we decided not to do the sort of longest day on Geonosis alone. I don't remember the discussions on how we got to Kashyyyk being the ending location, but in retrospect, it made sense for how things play out in the films, at least, to be on the planet before the full forces arrive was a good crescendo, for the ending. So.
Yeah, I had forgotten about Tarfful entirely. I had not gotten this far when I was replaying the game five-ish years ago. So this was all of this stuff was new to me.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Well, new. I mean, I hadn't played any of it in 15 years, so it was all. Oh yeah, that's right. There's this character, and of course, I didn't know about the film connections, but I did like that we sort of escorted this character for a while. The Wookiees are tough in their own right and can do a lot. There was also I got to the same room where that ragdoll bug that I described last time from the E3 demo, the theater demo was, and went, this is it right here. And the reason was there was a ragdolled Trandoshan like speared to the wall. That was why, because you knew that one had to be a ragdoll. That was why that had happened at all. And we later fixed that, but we had a way to deal with that problem, but we hadn't figured that out by E3 that year. But I definitely remember breaking into that room and being like, this is it. This is what I was talking about. And there's this whole thing where you start, like you said, you start low and you end up going up into the treetops and crossing these giant bridges and like all these, I guess, living areas sort of that they occupy. One of the things about the time is most of our environment is built from BSP, binary space partition data, and then decorated. We don't actually render the BSP, but that kind of gives the shape of everything. And we were pretty limited in terms of what else we could do in the environment. We have some decorative items, the hookahs and the benches and things like that, but there's not a lot of it. So it's hard to actually, I think that's one of the things that makes it difficult to sell where you're going and sort of tell the story of the space, because there was not a lot of budget.
Yeah. That's
and performance wise, for the sorts of decorative stuff. And we might have been able to do it with texture maybe, but we were so tight on memory.
Yeah, I mean, 15 years. On one hand, it doesn't sound like that long ago, but on another hand, that's like eons ago for game development. Like,
right, this
totally
was the original
different.
Xbox, 64 megabytes of memory.
Yeah,
right, and our executable was like 20. something like that. I know it wasn't that much, but it was
wow.
like just to start the game though. Like we took up almost half of that just because Unreal was such a beast. You know, it becomes less and less of an issue as time goes on because executables don't tend to grow as quickly. But just getting the basic, like the minimal data that you needed, no textures, no model, none of that stuff, but just like minimal data that you needed loaded all the time. We were easily into the high 20s of megabytes. So we had used almost half our memory and we hadn't even rendered anything yet. You know, it's just pretty absurd. Is why it was never on the PS2.
Right.
It would have been basically impossible. Or it would have looked so bad because everything would have had to be crunched down so much that it just wasn't.
We sure wanted, you know, there was definitely the desire, we wanted to, but just no.
We were given a very hard time about that too. It was a weird. I mean, it was a weird choice for the studio to go with Unreal, and we've sort of touched on that before a little bit. But it just was.
It was against.
We were not a company. Yeah, it was against the grain. It was. We were not a company that did that prior to that. I mean, we had. You know, it was well known for having come up with technology for each generation. We were there, you know, at the start of the PS2 generation with PS2 rendering that was all done in house and writing engines to do the games that we wanted to make and all of that stuff. So it was definitely an unusual choice to license something and then to then put it on a console. I don't know that many PS2 games shipped on Unreal Engine. Period.
No.
So I would think very few.
Yeah, and they were definitely down, like you said, downscaled quite a bit to accommodate that if they were. But and I think Epic was constantly trying to help figure that out for people. They just never did it. But I think for these levels, my two kind of big takeaways playing through them again. Well, one, I guess difficulty we should definitely talk about. But then the other one for me is I think we dropped the ball more than I remembered on just kind of objectives and what's pushing you through, because I just don't feel like they were memorable enough. They weren't as memorable as the other two operations, in my opinion. You know, things that because objectives in a military game like this are really. That's your drive, right? And yes, generally we were trying to quote unquote help the Wookiees and, you know, and stuff, but I think that, and that's on me. I'm sure a lot of the objectives, you know, the genesis of them were probably coming from me. I don't remember, but it's a group effort and collaborative with the level designers and such. But I just think it's a little longer of an operation than I remember as well. So it kind of gets stretched out and we're kind of just, you know, one we're saving some ammo crates and we're blowing up a bridge. That makes sense. The blowing up a bridge is a good one, you know, et cetera. That's very, traditional military stuff. But, you know, you look back, you're saving some Wookiees and then you blow up a ship at the end and that's kind of it, you know, after, 3 to 4 hours of gameplay, that's not too good. So that's something that stuck with me. But yeah, the difficulty,
I mean, I think that's also right. Another thing that the game does not particularly do well is have other characters, right? I mean, you have headset characters, but we have Wookiees here. Unfortunately, Wookiees don't speak English, so or whatever the equivalent is, a galactic common or something like that. So they can't be vectors for story and help you stitch through these things together and make them more important. You have to still rely on your remote advisor, right? Yeah. Who's saying, you know, we need to do the such and such and such, you know, and it would make, it would help a lot, I think, to be able to get a sense of who Tarfful is from Tarfful, right?
Yeah.
You know, for him to be able to say something when he stands up and, out of a prison complex, and give you goals that make sense, right? But we were. I mean, there's nothing we could do about that, sadly.
Yeah. And some of it is just sort of characterization stuff, but some of it is just, I think being more thoughtful about how to because again, I think the other two operations had more of a good build up to the events that were happening, and then your objectives relating to those events. You know what I mean? And this was much more of just a big battle's happening. You're going to do various things to help that battle, and that's, you know what I mean. Versus.
And you don't even know until the end of it that's what's going on, right?
Yeah, you're already
right. Yeah, you've already done all the work, and then it's like, as it turns out that you're the vanguard force and blah blah blah, and it's like, but that was my pod brother.
Right. So as on the game as a game developer, though, one thing I am proud of us on that is very obvious to the player, I'm sure, is how we found a clever, very, very light narrative to reuse our enemies.
Yeah.
In that you have this concept that's introduced in the second operation that the Trandoshans are working with the Separatists because they want their tech to, take over Kashyyyk or something like that. And so it gives us the perfect reason to have them show up in this context, which, doesn't make a lot of sense at the time unless you kind of know the films. But even then, I don't think some of these units even show up. So we had to use and be clever with our use.
Yeah, it was all about leveraging all that. I mean, it was not a big team, right? I mean,
no.
All the AI was done by two people.
Yeah,
I mean, that's just
insane. Yeah,
that is. Yeah, I mean, I did the space games and did all the AI as one person, but they were spaceships. They all just did space things. So, but even that today would not be that way, right? You probably have, 3 or 4 people doing stuff like that at the scale we work at today.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah,
it's just kind of extraordinary. I mean, they were also doing a ton of other gameplay related stuff. I mean, I say that, but it's also Nathan, who did all the enemy AI, was doing a ton of tool support to help the level designers author the content. A lot of additions to the Unreal editor to make visualization easier for them to understand. Oh, when I trigger this, there are literally lines drawn to the objects in the level that it's going to do something to activate or whatever these triggers do, just all over the place. And he was just fielding those requests all the time. On top of being responsible for all the enemy AI, it was just, that's not a thing, right? I mean, I helped out with some tool stuff when I came aboard just because that was an easy place to slot in, and every little bit helped. And for me to just kind of add things that way was something I could do, because there also wasn't like a specific timeline. This has to be done. I wasn't adding features; I was adding things that helped. Finding out that some color conversion was just wrong, or something like that. I remember Patrick Sirk, how annoyed he was. He was like, I don't think this is right. I was like, Patrick. I looked at the math. Oh my God. Yeah. Patrick Sirk came to mind because he did he did a lot of the environment art on Kashyyyk.
Yeah.
Especially down low in the jungle, the lower jungle areas, which is totally a thing that he enjoyed. He had been with us on the Starfighter games as well.
And I worked with him at Crystal as well.
Crystal. Yep.
Yeah, and well, the other side of my pride for the team on even though we figured out a clever fictional way to revisit them, as we talked about before, our enemy design in general was orthogonal enemy design, and so from a gameplay perspective, if you take fiction out of it entirely, from a gameplay perspective, you want to be able to have combat scenarios and encounter design where you have a super battle droid with a Trandoshan, because it just makes for more interesting situations, and more, just to have a more fun way to interact with those things in unexpected ways if you just take the fiction out of it. So we were able to figure out a strong arm away.
Right. Typically these days, though, I think what that would be another character of that archetype, right?
Yeah.
You wouldn't have more Trandoshans. You'd have something else that made sense with battle droids, I guess. And I agree that we did great. I don't know,
retconning our way through that or something.
Yeah, basically fictionally justifying all the things that we were doing to get more bang for buck out of things. So huge kudos.
So what about some of the specific scenarios from a difficulty standpoint we should probably hit next?
Yeah, the biggest one, I mean, there were a couple points where I had real trouble, but the biggest one was that bridge separation. You have to blow the bridge basically, right? And that's a huge deal. It happens in maybe the fourth kind of major section, something like that. It's not long before the end. The end is also a very big buildup that much of it is very difficult because you're narrowing down the squad at the same time. Because you have to, for some reason, focus fire from okay. Whatever. I was like, oh, good. I'm taking on a dwarf spider droid with 2 guys. Oh, now I'm doing it with 1 guy. That sort of thing. So that was difficult too, and I'm not sure I would tackle that in quite the same way either. But maybe one of them could be a little damaged when you go in. I'm just saying. But that bridge is pretty brutal, and that is the one place I died the most, probably in this whole replay through. I think my instincts kicked in on the Geonosian area. That's a real pinch point for me. I don't remember there being any particular area on the prosecutor except for just sort of those hangars that they can be quite tough. The bridge can be, I got through that on the first try. It's tough, but there's enough cover up there that you're kind of not.
It's more options.
Yeah, it's not everybody's getting taken down constantly. You're a little bit better covered. So it works pretty well actually. But this bridge, just brutal to get across, and not a lot of support from the game telling you how to do it. And I'm not even really sure. I think the only thing that I really did that was different when I finally beat it, and it did take me quite a number of tries, was to not try to send people across. Right. Right. Was the big thing, is like, you really just have to hold back and try to move up as slowly as possible. Yeah. And that, that's really hard because you've got that turret on the other side and you're like, let me just put a person on a turret, I'll mop them up. And even if I got somebody over there, there's way too many enemies around and you can't cover him effectively. Yeah. So,
and there's the maneuvers, the grenade maneuver that's in the middle of the bridge there, that is using a Wookiee as cover. As cover, which is, we went some places there. So, you really want to get somebody on that, but it's like, they're not really.
Oh, see, I didn't have anybody on that because I tried that and got.
No. I'm saying that's what I'm saying. I didn't either. I mean, I ultimately.
Oh, okay.
It's tempting you, right?
Right.
The way that it's pushing you. And so it kind of gets a little puzzling in a way, right? Where you're like, well, it's like, I think they want me to put this here, but it doesn't seem to be working. So there must be something else I have to do. And it ends up, for me, it ended up being a sort of a timing challenge, in that you're trying to take the droids that are coming out of the dispenser down as quickly as possible, so you have a gap before the next ones come out.
Right.
You know what I mean? And leveraging that gap of time to try to plant the bombs, and stuff like that. So that's sort of, but yeah, it's a meat grinder. You're definitely a lot of death there and not a lot of options. I think that's where maybe the hangars were something that on the ship that I liked a little bit more, because you actually had some release valves here and there.
Right. Yeah.
But and then I can't believe that we got this through this way, but the fact that the bomb doesn't blow up after you do all that, I was just like, what? Whose idea was that? How did we? How did I? That was probably my idea. What an idiot. And then you do get to blow it up with, like, by firing something. I guess that probably was the motivation.
The thinking, yeah.
But still, you don't want to go through all that pain and then have a misfire.
I think we wanted to see it as well, like to force the player to see it, which is all.
It's just bad design. We just should have come up with something else. It's just
I don't disagree, but I think that that's also kind of the things. I mean, one of the things about this level in particular is this, and this is one of the things I wanted to talk about, is that this was a milestone level for us. So what we did basically as our process was we typically had milestones that were 6 weeks, 8 weeks, where we were taking some part of the game and pushing it further than the rest of the team was going to be, basically to blaze the trail of what we were going to have to worry about when the whole team was doing that. And this was maybe the first level I want to say that we took to alpha, or even maybe to what we would have called beta, which is basically this thing's finished. I can't remember which of that it was, but it was notable in that, I mean, we put a lot of work behind our milestones. We did a lot of planning. The planning phase was a time as a lead that I really got to work with all the programmers and talk through what they were going to do and help them solve the problems, which is something I don't get to do as much anymore. I haven't really since this project. And then they would go back and figure out how much time we'd prioritize everything, all this stuff. We spent a lot of time on that. And then we would do all these tasks to support the sort of goal, which was, get this level to beta or alpha or whatever. And we got to the end of this milestone. We had done everything on our list, a lot of the bonus items, and the level just wasn't fun to play. So we had somehow missed a critical element of our process, which is, again, like, that's one of those tension things that we're talking about before, was we probably could have used somebody in there every day pushing forward the yes, but it's not fun button, and alerting us to the fact, to have that tension of like, hey, I know you've got all this great schedule, but the actual game that we're building from the parts that you're that you're putting together, it's not a race car. It's we'll be lucky if it moves at all. That tension I don't think was really on display, and so we ended up, that was one of the things we learned as a team that really helped us going forward, to be in that position of constantly re-examining and putting into our process as well a particular point of really evaluating where we were and saying, okay, yes, we would call it the mid-milestone review, but it was basically, look, we're on track to do these things, but is it giving us what we want, and should we prioritize some things over others to get the thing to be better? The mission changed as a result as well, as I recall, and this might have been kind of some of the holdover for that bomb not firing. Was originally you were going to cross the bridge, on top of the bridge, to get to where you could blow it, and then it would not blow, and then I think you had to go then underneath to check all the detonators. So you were fighting again, going underneath, right? So it was.
It's funny because when it misfired, I had this notion of, okay, now we got to go underneath. I wonder if some subconscious memory of that.
And that part was kind of interesting, but it was also, we couldn't really support it well. We couldn't make that feel interesting. Yeah, like we didn't want to do something where you were balancing and where you couldn't move kind of freely, but without having that, it didn't feel like the undercarriage of a bridge. There were just a lot of issues. Yeah,
it's hard to pull that visually off too. I'm sure that was inspired by that Half-Life 2 bridge level. That
almost certainly.
Remember that? Yeah, that was a pretty good one. Another Steven.
Half-Life 2 came out after we finished this game.
No. I was playing Half-Life 2 while we were in Jedi Starfighter. Pretty sure. Yeah, I'm gonna fact check you on that, but okay, go ahead and think if there's anything else you can think of. Yeah, but what I was gonna say is a failed, even though you don't ever set out to do it and you don't plan to do it, a failed milestone is actually pretty important for a team often.
Half-Life 2, November 14th, 2004. So if you were playing it in Jedi Starfighter, well done, sir.
Okay. Then no, I remember Carl playing it Wattenberg. I remember you remember him.
I do, yeah.
You remember him, yeah. But so okay, I'm mixing up. He was probably sitting over the Jedi Starfighter area playing. Anyway, yeah, I was just going to say that though that's what happened with that milestone. That failed milestones often are important ways to galvanize the team around what needs to be happening as well, right? So it's like you don't ever want to fail a milestone, you don't set out to fail them, but they do happen, and they are an important part of the process of improvement, and iteration. Yeah. So,
I mean, if you're never failing, you're not pushing hard enough either, right?
Yeah.
And in a way, I mean, I think we failed. What we learned was we weren't envisioning. Our process had become too forward, right? Had become too more important than the product to some degree at that point. It was good that it happened when it did, and made us really examine. Okay, well, what's not there, right? I mean, we basically added, and then we just spent another 2 weeks and we made it better. We ended up cutting all that stuff underneath, I think, and then punched up a lot of the audio, really, I think was part of it. Just a lot of the spectacle wasn't there. And just adding some of that stuff, we were like, okay, we're not as far off as we thought. We just didn't pay attention to the spit and polish aspects that we're really going to need to put into every level in order to make them sing. So it was a good process and important, and valuable, certainly very valuable to us as a team. One of the other things about this section of the game that we sort of talked about is, I already mentioned that all the sorts of tools are available to the player, but also as we're seeing all of the enemies, they all can do all the things that they can do. Basically, all the things that the AI in the game ever can do are all on display. You would actually notice some of these things happening more often. You want to talk about that?
Yeah, I mean, you last episode mentioned a small example of sort of showing how, in the smoke and mirrors way, how mercenaries were coordinating, or the illusion that they were coordinating based on some of the AI calls that were happening and such. I had a funny moment happen in one of these levels in this last session where, let's see, I think at first the mercenary threw a grenade at one of my guys. He threw the grenade back, and that happened a couple more times where they were throwing a grenade back and forth, like before
playing grenade hacky sack.
Yeah, and it was over a piece of cover too, which we couldn't get to them. So it was literally like this hilarious little moment. But
no, you take it.
Yeah. But it was a reminder of just these little tricks, additional tricks that you guys did with the AI to give some cool, moments of intelligence that, in and of themselves are pretty simple, but when you put them together, they add up to make, a seemingly much more intelligent AI. But I mean, what were some of the, we also, I don't remember if we talked about this, but even things like how we would have the squad AI leading the players so you saw them more often was something that we kind of discovered through the course of development, because they're always behind you otherwise. So like, what are some of the other tricks and things that you guys did to make them come alive so much? Both enemies and friendly.
Enemies and the squad. Yeah. So I think that's the squad being out in front of you was one of those things that had come up actually maybe on that offsite. So it's good to bring it up now. We ended up having to lean on it's a pretty linear game. It's not an open world game. You can't kind of just go anywhere. You basically, it's a line. The whole game is a line, more or less. I mean, there's little arenas and things like that, but for the most part, going from A to B, there's only really one way. And so we just leaned on that. And we did what I called bread-crumbing, which was basically the level designers would put in an ordered sequence of, non-visible objects, just little tokens in the environment that said, this one comes after this one, comes after this one. So as the player was approaching those, I mean, they basically had collision radii or something like that, or just some distance function or something. It would be basically signaling to the clones, well, the player's going in this direction. They just came from C. They're on their way to D. So you should be out heading from D to E or whatever. And that was something that I had come up with design-wise in terms of just like, okay, this is how we should achieve this problem based on the game we're making. It turns out we can actually lean on some of this information, although John Hancock and the level designers actually did the work. With the enemy AI, the behavior system that John had come up with was pretty similar to what we would call behavior trees now, which are basically the standard for enemy AI. And a lot of what we're doing in this game you see in modern games and hasn't changed dramatically since then. But there was no such thing as behavior tree at the time. They're basically ways to have checks and then implement, what you're going to do in response to those checks kind of over time. They're sort of structured. They're like tree structures, behavior trees. And you're kind of in some section of the tree, but you have ways to move around the tree based on, things that happen in the environment. We really just kind of pulled out all the stops on possible things you could do. Like one of the things the squad will do is, especially if there's time, if there's not a lot of enemies around, they will actually do multiple path finds to figure out where they want to go next. And they will basically, inside the AI, it will vote on which is the best path to take, based on the state of the clone. So if, for example, they're low on health, the thing that wants health will rate a path that takes them near a health station higher, so that they're more likely to pick that path. And picking that path, then they'll also be more likely to trigger the behavior of, oh, there's one next to me, and then do all the things that entails. So I should go and stand next to it and start healing and say rule 39 and blah, blah, blah. Yeah, so there's a whole huge, we weren't sort of precious about what we did. We weren't like, no, they should be able to figure things out. It's like, you know what? If we can get the level designers to help them figure things out so they look better, that's a good marriage. I mean, that's one of the things that you and I on this podcast always talk about, like camera and level design. This is like AI and level design
right.
Working together, and the level designer knowing things about the level that it can tell the AI to make the AI do a better job. And that was really, with enemy AI in general, a lot of the impetus behind a lot of the decisions we made was, how can we make this a partnership? That's one of the things that I've had trouble convincing people moving forward in my career. I won't say more than that. It's just, you really need to, these things need to work together in concert as harmoniously as possible, in order to get the most out of them. Otherwise, it just, things will look stiff or wrong. The AI, neither the enemy nor the squad AI is perfect. I'm one of the things when we play our games is we see things and we go, ugh, we could have done better with this, that, or the other thing. But in general, I've had people on stream say, yeah, I would never notice that. Like, I wouldn't pick up on that. And the AI generally is better, is good enough most of the time that you don't notice the few times when it's bad, or doesn't stand out necessarily super badly. Yeah. And a lot of it was just Nathan's creativity as well when it came to enemy stuff. A lot of things with the enemies were just him. That throwing back the grenades was purely just him. I was more of a systems like level design of that stuff, and would say, hey, it'd be cool if, the bread-crumbing or the paired animation system, especially for the Wookiees, but in general, any paired up animations were things that I suggested a system for, and then they came up with lots of ways to use it. And he would add things like, it'd be cool if you could shoot the jetpacks, right? And they would go shooting off into, the stratosphere, and he would just kind of add and we had sort of an enemy room where you could go and see all these things working, which had its pluses and minuses because none of them were moving, so it made it easier to hit them in their soft spots. Anyway,
yeah, I mean that state that you mentioned of sort of like having, what do players notice versus, how many times do you notice the things that are going wrong versus going right? That's sort of like, that's the holy grail sweet spot you want anyway, right? Where it's like, because like you said earlier in the podcast, you can go forever trying to make the perfect AI where there's no mistakes or whatever, but literally there's no end to that. What you want is to just get right over the line where the player just doesn't notice some of the stuff that doesn't quite make sense, and they generally notice all the good stuff, and then ship it. It's like you don't want to like go crazy, making yourself go crazy to make everything seem so specifically realistic and perfect.
Yeah, I mean, I might feel differently about a game that you're meant to play over and over and over again, right? Because in that case, you will notice those things as time goes on. If you're playing, a roguelike or something like that, those flaws, the bar is much higher, I should say.
Yeah.
For the sorts of flaws you'll accept and be okay with, and production realities are also a thing. So, I mean, a lot of these things certainly we would have noticed.
But I think I think in that case, the design of the game would need to change as well, right? Like a roguelike being different. Or an example of something that I just played not long ago, shooter Remnant Beyond the Ashes. No, Remnant from the Ashes. Played through that game co-op with a friend, and it's like a Division or like a Destiny, the way the enemies, it's a loot shooter kind of game, right? So there's not as much of that sort of coordination needed, so the AI is doing not simpler things, but just different things. The level design's different, etc. So I feel like when there's that repetition, you actually need them to sort of be simpler in certain ways. They're not. There's some of those. Those similar little moments happen, but they don't have as much of the depth because it is so grindy,
right?
And you just notice different things in a game like that. But.
Yep, for sure. Yeah. You really, that's a big part of it, is you have to think through the game you're trying to build and what the challenges are there. I mean, sometimes you're just guessing ahead of time, right? I mean, we didn't guess. There's a lot of stuff that we didn't guess and had to respond to, and that's fine too, as long as you're. I mean, I would say it's to their credit, John and Nathan in particular, that the game just the process of building the game could just adapt to those needs, and it wasn't like they had built an AI and oh, too bad. It doesn't. We have to totally rewrite it because it doesn't do X, Y, or Z, and that just wasn't the case. I mean, they did a lot of rewriting of things that were in Unreal that weren't able to support the things that we wanted to do, but that was just what we had, right? I mean, we're starting from here. We need to add things. I think we ripped out the whole pathing system to do a different style of pathing, which became more the norm later. It had been node based, I think, and we moved it to be polygon based or triangle based path spaces or walkable area rather than point to point, which just didn't look natural. So a lot we did for sure to make it really sing.
Cool. Yeah, I mean, I guess we can close up, but I mean, I still, though I'm biased, I think finishing the game on this sort of separation of the squad, and that sort of tension that builds with that last level. Even though, there's some difficult moments, but and there's other times in the game when you're split up. But I think like peeling people off as you're going, it felt like an ending to me. It felt like something. Coming.
Yeah, it's good. Yep. Games are hard to end, and it's a pretty good end.
Yeah, I think it was Harley's level, right? And she did a great job with that.
It was.
And And I think though there's there's a little bit of a best of enemy section there, right? Because
Yeah.
like you see a little bit of you even get some of those eggs in. Somehow we snuck those
Ugh,
in, which is
eggs.
very ham-fisted, but fine. And you're fighting, like you said, spider droids, in pretty rough situations and too difficult, but still it felt like a crescendo. And then that one main room with the ship, I think, was well laid out, right, where you still can see the other Delta members firing from their turrets, so there's
Yep.
and
Yep.
there's a big target, and so I think under the circumstances, that was and then yes, we have a cliffhanger that we'll never know, and a little nice cameo of one of my favorite characters.
Yeah. Your namesake.
My namesake, Yoda. And for some reason in my head, I thought we just had him over VO, and then I was delightfully surprised to see his hologram. I don't know why I thought he was just over.
That's best. Is that who I think it is?
Yeah, it's nice. And then, it was obviously meant to be that sort of interstitial between the two movies. So to see the battle starting, at the end of the game, I thought was cool too. So not necessarily patting ourselves on the back, but I do think if I try to take a step back, it had a bit of a nice crescendo there.
Yeah, no, I think that the final level, difficulty aside, I actually got that room with the eggs. Oh, getting through there was brutal. I kept going back out and healing, and it cannot have been very fun to watch me stream. But
what I used in that room heavily is I stood back and I used the pistol a lot.
I ended up using the pistol a lot as well. After I died a couple times, I was like, I'm just running out of ammo, and but they also dodge so much. Oh, it's tough.
Yeah,
it was tough. I think the enemies could throw themselves in the path of your blaster a little bit more.
They're too good.
They're a little bit too good. They know the bullet's coming. She's like, I don't know how I feel about that, but anyway. So we're at the end of a series. We happen to know some of the developers on this game, as it turns out. So we're gonna actually do more interviews than we normally do. And rather than do takeaways as kind of a way to kind of finish up the series, I think we'll just kind of let those conversations speak for themselves. That will be for at least a couple of weeks, additional interviews. We might have a chance to sort of get from other people that worked on the project, hey, how did this impact you? Like, what did you learn here? Which I think would be interesting, since we learned it together. In a lot of cases, it'll be kind of interesting to hear what people took away from this project. So, and probably some more of the history around the development as well will just naturally come up. We haven't recorded any of them yet, so I can't yet say. But yeah, I look forward to doing that and talking with all these folks. So
yeah, it's gonna be fun. It can be unique and for the podcast, obviously, because we definitely like to have guests on, but we've only had a couple cases where we've had more than one interview episode based on a game. I think only a couple.
Yeah, like Thief we did, and
Thief, TIE Fighter we did.
That's right, because we had Larry and then we had Reed and Darren.
So we've done it a couple times, but this will be just because of the uniqueness of it that we'll be able to do a little bit more. So fingers crossed that they all pan out. But yeah,
cool. Well, let's in that case we will turn to reviews and emails and things. We did actually have a review from Blarg42. Remember that recent request of a singing review, but it was email, and I said it doesn't count.
Oh yeah.
Well, Blarg42 wrote in the review, and so I need to dig out the email and remember how that song goes, because I never watched the show, so I have to. I'm going to have to prepare for that. It came in today, so I haven't had a chance to do that. So Blarg42, I've spoken with the producer, but he says I have another week to review the melody before we go into that. So we'll just go on to these emails that were, of course, sent to devgameclub@gmail.com. You have the first one, sir.
Okay, we're going to do all of them. Do you want to do all of them today from a time?
Yeah, we can try to do all of them. We'll see if we get to all 4, but we'll go. I'm keeping an eye on the clock.
Okay. All right. Subject of this first one is various from Raymond Kasson. Kason?
Probably Kason, yeah.
I'll say Kason, though Kasson is, I like that too. Raymond.
If that is his real name.
If that is your real name. Hi, Brett and Tim. The first chunk is part of an email that I forgot to send last week. I recommend Box Boy for an example of how to implement difficulty of puzzles in games. The basic concept is that the player can extend a limited chain of boxes. The limit varies from the player character that can be dropped to form a platform, stay connected to the character to act as a shield, and can even be used kind of like a grappling hook. Man, this game is hard to describe in words. Yeah, hard to envision. The game counts the amount of boxes a player uses to beat stages, and you can use it to beat stages, and you can use as many boxes as you want to complete a level. But if you want to 100% a level, you have to complete levels using less than a certain amount of boxes while also collecting crowns placed in stages. The player can also apply skins to the character that gives you extra abilities, increased movement speed, higher jump, and extra boxes added to the chain, for example, and has a hint system that costs 3DS play coins. Oh, weird. All of this leaves it up to the player to decide on a per level / puzzle basis how difficult the game should be, rather than having some global modifier that adjusts the difficulty. Cool. That's a great example. He goes on to say the Curse of Monkey Island has 2 difficulty levels where the harder difficulty modes puzzles usually has more steps to complete and require more components. For example, at one point, you need to get a golden tooth from a pirate's mouth, so you offer the pirate a jawbreaker, which of course you do, which will loosen his tooth. You then hand him some gum, and he'll start blowing bubbles. The tooth will be in the bubble, so you use the pin to pop the bubble, which causes the tooth to drop onto the floor. In regular mode, the puzzle stops after you pick up the tooth, but in the harder mode, the pirate checks you when you try to leave and confiscates his tooth. If this happens, you need to repeat the bubble popping process. So to smuggle the tooth out, you need to chew some bubble gum, put the tooth in it, inhale helium from a balloon, and now it's your turn to blow a bubble. The tooth will then float through an open window and pop outside for you to retrieve.
Yeah, you've probably forgotten all of that in the Curse of Monkey Island.
Oh my goodness, I did. Though one of my favorite solutions to a puzzle is also in that game, which I can tell you in a second. That is a great example. And a good example because it's a Monkey Island game. Finally, he says, now for part 2. Resident Evil 4 does dynamic difficulty scaling. Game Maker's Toolkit has a video about it. It also gives a few other examples of it and covers topics like speedrunners exploiting the system to make it easier to run through certain parts of the game. Regards, Raymond. My favorite solution to one of those puzzles in that game is the one where the guy's on the beach sunbathing, and he has the map tattooed to his back.
Oh, yes.
And you have to actually... you have to sunburn him or something, and then you peel the layer of skin off of his back to get the map. Oh, so good. Anyway, thank you, Raymond. Those are great examples. Boxboy.
I think he had given the link for the Game Maker's Toolkit, and it's quite good. It is RE4, and they never talked about it, which was another thing, is that they don't. I mean, I don't know if it came up later or whatever, how Mark Brown had found out about it, but he did a video about
I never knew.
Difficulty. No, and I'm a proponent of that for certain types of games for sure. Like I get it. I mean, I think it's really when you're playing a game again, multiple times often that you're like trying to hit the challenges of the game and things like that on its own footing. For most, I think the wide segment of the market is just like, I don't want to see this too many times. So they're happy with help. I think the widest segment of the market is that. So I'm generally in line with that in terms of my own preferences. But I don't mean as a player, but I mean like as a developer, it's like I want to make sure that those people are happy, the greatest number. But yeah, those are good examples of different ways to scale and deal with difficulty. Box Boy is a game or series I've wanted to check out for a long time. So maybe this will finally give me the impetus. Narrator, it didn't. Anyway, here's the second email from. Okay, so I didn't give you this one, even though it would have meant you having to pronounce this name. Yeah. I think it's Welsh. So it's spelled Dawfydd. So, of course, I believe it's pronounced David. Anyway, the subject is thank you. Hi, Brett and Tim. Just wanted to write in and thank the two of you for continually producing one of the most fascinating podcasts I've come across. I find your perspectives on the various titles you have played through utterly compelling and have been blown away by the devs you've gotten on your show to discuss their careers and seminal works. Your current playthrough of Republic Commando has been particularly interesting as it's a game I thoroughly enjoyed when it came out and served as a launching pad for some of my favorite bits of the EU. Expanded universe, especially what is now Legends, that of the Karen Travis's Republic Commando novels and her development of Mandalorian culture. I loved what the RCs brought to the universe, and the personalities of Delta Squad were utterly compelling. Sure, they are stereotypes, and as you've both pointed out, the individual specializations don't actually do much, but it just works. So much so that I'm looking above my computer desk and have the action figure for Scorch standing proud, and somewhere around here I have the gift set they did of the full squad, plus a few sets of the minis Wizards of the Coast did for the RCs in their old Star Wars collectible miniatures game. Kinda adorable. I was just curious about a couple of things, though. As regards to Republic Commando novels, the action figures and miniatures, were those things that you guys had any input or dealing with as they developed? If not, were you aware of them before they released, or was it a bit of a surprise? Now, anyone who has finished RC knows it ends on one hell of a cliffhanger. Was this intentional as a hook for a sequel, or was it more to add some stakes to the Delta's mission, kind of a Rogue One situation, or neither? And the big one, did you have plans for further games following Republic Commando? Was it intended as more of a one-and-done situation? If there were ideas for a sequel, are you able to share them? I know that myself, I've spent a good chunk of time spitballing ideas with friends, and I'll admit we were probably way too ambitious in our ideas, but names like Imperial Commando or Rebel Commando just come to mind so easily, to say nothing of the material of the old WEG, that's something games, West End Games RPG books contained. Yes, I may have spent too much time reading the old Rebel Spec Force source book. Equally, if you're not able to talk about these ideas, I fully understand. This just seemed like a good opportunity to ask. And lastly, did either of you watch Clone Wars, and was it a kick to see Delta Squad show up and later a lone RC in action? Anyway, thank you again, and happy gaming. Regards, David. And yes, that is my real name. Look forward to hearing you pronounce it. Sorry if I murdered it. I do not listen to Dylan Thomas's Children's Christmas or whatever it is every year, like some people do. So I'm not up on my Welsh. Yeah. So those questions in order. So the first one was about the novels, the Karen Travis novels, and the other stuff. Associated with it. I think I had no involvement in that, but I do think that you might have been.
Yeah, for the first novel I was, Ryan Kaufman and I tag teamed on that with Karen, and we were part of the sort of like, sourcing / hiring process for her for that first one, because they did want one to come out around the time of, and obviously we needed to work with her on our story and blah, blah, blah. So she kind of got the idea of it. But Ryan was really the point person there because he was one of our writers, and he would work with her on making sure it was accurate and stuff. But that one did so well. And by the time she progressed forward, we were both gone from the company, and I wasn't really involved with Lucas stuff, for that time, even though I went back to Lucas many years later. So she continued on with great success on other novels and the Mandalorian stuff and such. And then the Clone Wars show was coming out, and I think unfortunately some of that stuff started to, which was considered canon because George was helming the Clone Wars show with David Filoni. So I think some of her stuff kind of got pushed into EU and was no longer canon because of that, unfortunately. But it's good stuff. Yeah. I think she might have even had an Imperial Commando book that was called Imperial Commando. I don't remember if that came out or not, but Greg Knight actually did the cover for that book, who worked on this game. And so, yeah, so she did good stuff out there. So I agree on the figures and stuff. Most of that stuff was after I had left, so I wasn't involved because the toys tend to take longer to do. And to be honest,
I wasn't even aware.
Yeah,
there
I
were
think,
toys.
to be honest, like I think the success of the game was a bit of a surprise.
That was a total surprise. I mean,
for Lucas
Jim Ward really didn't believe in it. The president, it was just close enough to done, and I think Darren still had enough, sort of say and sway as a longtime project lead, and having been quite a successful one, to be able to keep it alive. I mean, a couple of titles were canceled, right as he came on. And the whole, we didn't really talk about a lot of that stuff, but no, he didn't. I mean, they kind of released it in February, which is not when games come out. It certainly wasn't when games came out back then. That was kind of an also ran period. Like, well, didn't come out in the Christmas window, but we got to get it out for fiscal year type time.
Yeah.
And
it did better than they thought, for sure.
Far better. Yeah.
But my point on that is because toys have very long lead time, and no one was really it wasn't on their radar. There were no toys being I don't remember toys being produced during production, which they would have had to have started like a year before we launched for them to come out with the game. So they were after the fact. So I would have already been gone. Maybe like the Scorch figure, I might have, because that one was earlier. But we actually had a really cool team gift that we didn't talk about. That was a cold cast statue of the squad that later,
a maquette, they call it.
Maquette that was bronzed, kind of painted, and every team member got one, and it was done by Gentle Giant. I forget who did it. It was a bit of a gift that I think Chris Williams really finagled and did an awesome job getting it. One of the best team.
I think it was a small run, like they had done 500 of them or something like that. So they were available to be purchased as well, but he made sure that everybody who worked on the game got one.
Yeah, he got a batch of them for us, and they were numbered right, and so he got the number one and something like that, and I got number 2 or something. But anyway, the point I bring that up is they eventually later released that same maquette painted for the public because it did so well and sold out. So they did another run, and then they also did some other statues. But yeah, I wasn't involved with any of those. So it definitely was a little bit of that little engine that could kind of project, because it did spawn. I don't know if the listeners have seen it, but even Battlefront 2 just released a skin, a Republic Commando skin that you can play in the game now for Battlefront 2. Was apparently a grassroots sort of effort within the team, DICE. There's some fans there, so you can now play. I don't think it's specifically like anyone from Delta, but it's the armor that Greg designed.
That's cool.
And the weapon.
That's cool.
So still alive.
The cliffhanger. Was it a hook for a sequel?
Yeah. We talked about it earlier in the episode, but we had intended to do a future game, at least one. I mean, we both worked on Starfighter games, and I think generally we always tend to want to try to think about the next thing because we want to make fun games, and I don't think we had intended at the time when we started to leave the company. So,
right. I mean, it's a big investment to learn how to build a particular type of game, right?
Making a sequel with that team, that's like that would
have been amazing. Yeah, would have been amazing.
Yeah. So
yeah. I mean, that was definitely. I remember one of the things Nathan Martz would talk about would be, they didn't really figure out what they were doing with this little product called GTA until the third one, right? It sometimes takes a while, right? And we did pretty good out of the gate for our first, for the team, the first person shooter I think anybody had worked on. I guess some of the level designers had worked on
Jedi Knight and
Jedi Knight, yeah. But it had been a while anyway.
Yeah, for sure.
And certainly the people, the leads for the most part had not done a ton of that either. So I'd never done one. Haven't really done one since. I guess Fallout sort of is, but yeah, that's a big investment to build a team around knowing how to do that stuff. That's why teams tend to do the same things over and over again, because rebooting from scratch. And we've definitely also moved from a period where it's easy to do that because the games are that much more expensive to do, and there's so much more specialization in what people do on them. So yeah, definitely intended there to be a sequel, and that was kind of a hook. I've talked about the two possible ways that it might have gone afterwards. One with an Order 66 game, and one with a help start the Republic Army, I guess, guerrillas, as possible things. So you can find me. I talked about that. I think somebody asked me about that a couple of years ago. I don't know whether it was a anniversary or something like that, but yeah, I talked about that stuff previously. As far as the Clone Wars go, I've never watched it. Was that kind of cool for you to see?
Yeah, I feel like I might have mentioned it before, but Dave Filoni was actually a fan of the game as well, and showrunner for Clone Wars, but also one of the showrunners for Mandalorian. Yeah, he's a great guy, and he was a fan of the game and fan of Delta, and so he eventually, I think I must have joked about this at some point, but because once Disney came in and as David, wait, is it David? Is that what you said? David, as David said, became Legends. So Legends, which means, non-canon essentially. But Clone Wars as a TV show is considered one of the canon elements since Disney came in, because it was part of, George's sort of legacy and stuff, and Dave Filoni stuff. So I always like to joke, because Dave put a cameo of Delta in the show, they are now canon and are no longer Legends or EU, because he snuck them in there. And it was literally just a tiny scene, and it's a little homage kind of cameo, but they're in there. So
yep. Yeah, no, I actually have seen that scene. So Dave Collins, who was the audio supervisor on the game, he's big in Star Wars still. Like he's like the front man for Celebration, I guess, right? He does a lot of the on-stage interviews and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. And the year they did a sort of season preview of whatever season of the Clone Wars that the Commandos showed up in, and they showed like a 45-second thing, and the Commandos were in it, and the crowd, this I actually have seen, the crowd went nuts. They had to play it again, and of course Dave knew, and Dave was like, wow, that's quite a response. Maybe we should see that again. And he called out that it was that. So I actually have seen that little clip. It's totally context free for me because I haven't seen literally any other minute of that show. But they did re-show that part of it, and I think they may have even briefly talked about it on stage at the time. So
yeah.
And I guess that was an interview maybe with Filoni. I don't follow any of this stuff anymore, so I don't really know. But anyway, yeah, thought I would chime in with that as far as that goes.
Cool. No, I didn't. I wasn't witness to that. So cool.
No. All right. You know what? Let's do one more. Okay. We'll do the one you have, because the one I have is quite long, and I've edited it down, and I'm like nervous. Like, did I edit too much? So maybe we'll go to yours.
We have plenty of opportunity.
We'll have opportunities to get back to it.
Yeah. Okay. Subject is Republic Commando is solid and you should feel proud, from David Norton.
Thanks, Norton, pal.
Long-time listener, first-time caller, and first-time playing along on PC. Oh, interesting. I had seen Republic Commando in my fraternity, but never got around to playing it until now, about 11 years later. I agree the game has tough spots, even on easy, but after a few tries, you can figure out something that works, except for the bridge at Kashyyyk that had far too little cover. Is that the bridge we were talking about?
That's the bridge, yeah.
Far too little cover, and I had a bear of a time knocking out both Super Battle Droid spawners. Yes, we just talked at length about that. We agree, Dave. I have gotten used to the gunplay and appreciated how each weapon is focused while still allowing for emergency uses, like using the assault rifle at long range. I especially like how the pistol recharges rather than reloading, which favors accurate burst usage. I also appreciate how the other AI team members actually are decent shots in combat and aren't just decorative as in other games. They seem smart enough to do about half of the expected tasks on their own, healing and reviving being fairly solid. And I very rarely feel like I'm babysitting or waiting for them to catch up or directing traffic on the battlefield, as I had been afraid I would be. Certainly newer games have screwed this up far worse than Republic Commando. Congrats on a great game, and as always, I enjoy hearing your commentary, especially about a game you personally worked on. Best regards, David Norton.
Thank you, David. Yeah, that's it's good to hear. Yeah, I think that the work there is really solid as far as making them pretty smart. Although, I don't know if we've ever talked about this on the cast, but after each of the games that we've done together, I would ask you what's the one thing we could have done better in tech. To support the design. For example, for Jedi Starfighter, I wish we had, it was sort of like after a level, I wish we had made it clearer that you got the new weapon that you got, because there's basically a weapon progression in that game of new stuff that you get, but we never call it out. You get all the secondary weapons kind of and powers and things like that, the Jedi powers. After basically every level is sort of rewards, and we don't tell you, like we don't celebrate the fact that you got a new thing.
Great.
I don't know if you remember that conversation. Do you remember what it was for Republic Commando?
This has come up before, and you've asked me before, and I've forgotten then, and I don't remember now. So no, I don't.
You said, I wish they could have been smarter though.
Did I?
Yep.
I mean that seriously?
Yeah, no, seriously. That is what you said.
Oh man, what a jerk.
Yep.
I was actually, I mean, that's so dumb. Who knows why I said that? Don't listen to me. Because of playing along this time, what?
Don't worry, I don't listen to you.
It's weird, yeah. No, playing this time, I was impressed all over again. I mean, they're definitely. I agree with Dave. There's a lot of moments where you're like, huh, wow, that's pretty impressive. They just did that thing, and very. Trust me, I've worked on games like this since, that have shipped, and difficult for different reasons, for sure. And I think the linearity of the game is one of the biggest advantages that we had to allow for this to happen versus some other games I've worked on that were not as linear. But yeah, I mean, even modern games, like you said, still mess this up. So I think the focus and like you said, the collaboration between the content and the tech team, pretty critical for that to work, and just a good team in general. So yeah, it's I agree. It's and thank you for the kind words there. We are proud. I think, I wrote in my notes, I forgot to say it earlier, but I wrote in my notes, one of my summaries for myself, I think, is that after playing this, with so many years in between, is that I think this is a good game with a lot of potential. You know what I mean? Like it is like, you can see there's like
I mean, once we knew what we were building, I mean, I think we talked about this off mic earlier, but it was like, we actually made most of the game in that final year. right? I mean, a lot of the time before that was figuring out how to make the game. You know, and even in the year that last year, the year 2004, there was still stuff we were figuring out. The breadcrumbing I mentioned earlier was a thing. There's a lot of sort of little tweaks. Tons of enemy AI was built this year. Even some of the maneuvers I think were added or built up and changed and things like that as we continued to figure out how to build the game we were making. And as a result, we cut some enemies. So, I mean, I definitely remember reading the reviews a few weeks ago, whatever ones I could find, and finding like, yeah, people didn't like that there wasn't more enemy variety, which is definitely a back of box kind of, you know, like, oh, 33 enemy types or whatever. And it's like, okay, well, you know, those things never really impressed me as a player. But I know reviewers look to that stuff and say, I'd like more of X, Y, or Z, because they weren't really picking up what we were putting down as far as mixing them, I think. They weren't seeing that. And, you know, we also weren't calling that out as well. It wasn't as obvious that that's what was going on. It was kind of just organically happening. So, you know, there's things like that. I think that in a sequel we would have really called out and gotten better at, and some of our, excuse me, some of the areas where we were a little unrefined, you know, that bridge in Kashyyyk, you and I have already talked about, like, how would we approach that now? What would we do to make that a little easier?
Well, go ahead.
Yeah. No, go.
I was going to say, think of how many game franchises that you love with the number 2 after the second version of them, you know, really are the ones.
Yeah, I mean, Half-Life 2 that you were playing in 2002.
All right. Another good example of my memory. No, but like Mass Effect 2, Uncharted 2, you know, like, you know, there's just Assassin's Creed 2, you know, there's just a lot of, it is for teams like we are on, it is often the dream to make a second game of the same type with the team, you know?
Yeah.
And unfortunately you don't often get to do that. So, that was the goal. Yeah. And that's where a sequel would have come from if we had made it. So.
Yeah, I mean, talking about that, I mean, one of the real strengths of Jedi Starfighter was that we all knew how to build it. So we were able to, I mean, we made that in a very short time. You know, but we did a ton in that. I mean, the game is still not as performant as I would like, certainly looking back on it now and knowing what I know about how to build games now. There's a lot I would do differently, but, you know, we dramatically improved performance so that we could do a lot more. We added up, you know, big systems, you know, to support things that you wanted to do, like, capital ships, and but we also had a greater variety of missions, what was going on in them. We tied missions together better because we actually knew how long it took to make missions, so we didn't have to cut a bunch of them, etc. Like, we just knew how to build it, and we could push things further. And not every direction we pushed was successful, but you know, I can just imagine, you know, having seen that with Starfighter and Jedi Starfighter, just what another Commando game would have been like at the time. And I mean, I would have loved to continue working with that team for a long time, and that would have been an easy way to spend another decade because they were great. It was a lousy way to cap my LucasArts career in terms of you know, how it was all going down there at the end, but I couldn't have asked for a better team to go out with. So
yeah, we alluded to it, I think, in the first episode, but to your point just there, the other interesting thing about the fact that there was a big shift happening at LucasArts, and a lot of big stuff was about to happen as we were shipping, but to the team's credit, and I still tell the story today, to the team's credit, like, everyone was committed to the game and hunkered down despite chaos around us. You know what I mean? And then we kind of just, the solace was in the game itself, and just everyone wanted to finish, you know, despite
and finished strong. I mean, nobody was phoning it in. Yeah.
No. I mean, and because of what was happening in the company, it was a perfect opportunity for people to start leaving, and just like start peeling out. But they didn't. They waited until the game was done, and so that's a testament to the team as well, and that the commitment that everyone had to this particular game. So, yeah, yep, agreed.
Yep.
Thanks, David.
Games are made by teams. I mean, Tim's name might be at the top. It might be on the box, but
it's not on either of those things. Not at the top, nor will it ever be on the box.
I will say one of the things that I appreciate about the games we did there is that all three of them, the credits start with game designed by, and it says the team, the Starfighter team, the Jedi Starfighter team.
I was always
Commando team
about that. Yep.
And that is absolutely the case. And it is not always the case, right? I mean, it is absolutely the case for those games, but it has not historically been the case in the rest of my career that you could really say that. I mean, everybody contributes to the game, obviously, but not necessarily always to the design. And definitely with this game, you feel like everybody is helping figure out how to make this game, and that's why making a sequel would have been really, really exciting. So yeah, yep. I mean, I liked the ability of LucasArts to have the opportunity to do different sorts of things, but that was also just kind of where the industry was at the time, where it wasn't a huge change to go to some other game type, because everybody was figuring out what game genres could do. Nothing was sort of fixed, and so there was always room for improvement, and you didn't have a huge tech hill to climb to catch up to something somebody else was doing necessarily. So it was an interesting time. We'll kind of never, I mean, indie games are kind of there now, right? Because there's good tools to get them to a good starting place, where they can start to differentiate themselves. So, smaller budget, obviously, but yeah, anyway. So thank you for those. We still have another email and some singing to get to next week, but we'll leave that for then. So thank you for those. You can find us on the web at devgameclub.com and on Twitter at devgameclub, where you can also find my co-host at
Tim Longo Jr. with a JR at the end.
He's also on the gram. You can find me at twitch.tv/BrettDuville. I am still playing Kirby and Mickey. I've been having some minor health issues that have made it hard for me to stand for long periods, so I've kind of been off and on a bit. I'm trying to do it more. We'll see how it goes. But catch me most weeknights, and on the weekends I'll play whatever we're playing. We're not announcing yet what we're playing next for the cast because, A, we're not really sure. We have some ideas, but also we know we will have some interviews coming up, so look forward to those. Our intro and outro music was written and performed by Kirk Hamilton and commissioned by friend of the cast, Aaron Evers. So have fun playing games this week and stay off the bridge. Good night.
Good night.